The rain hammered against the windows of Jenna Caldwell's apartment on the 17th floor of a sleek Manhattan high-rise, turning the city lights into a blurred watercolor of yellows and blues. It was 10:47 p.m., the digital clock on her kitchen counter blinking indifferently. Jenna stood leaning against the sill, her reflection in the glass, a ghostly outline of a woman who had once chased dreams but now barely recognized herself. At 32, she was a successful copywriter at a bustling ad agency, crafting slogans that sold illusions of happiness to the world. But tonight, like so many nights before, the weight of her own facade pressed down on her. The breakup had been 6 months ago, clean, clinical, without the dramatic tears or shouted accusations she had imagined in movies. Mark had simply packed his things one evening and said, "We're not growing together anymore." A part of her had known it was coming. Another part still whispered that she should have fought harder. Since then, the apartment felt like a tomb, echoing with the silence of unanswered questions. Friends told her to date again, to get back out there, but the thought exhausted her. She didn't want passion or promises. She wanted someone to witness her existence without demanding she perform. Her phone buzzed with a confirmation. Service booked, one-night escort, no commitments, no expectations. It wasn't about sex. Jenna had specified that clearly in the app's anonymous request. It was about the quiet company, a presence to fill the void without probing or pitying. She wiped her eyes, straightened her sweater, and waited. 3 soft knocks echoed through the door. Jenna hesitated, her hand on the knob before opening it. The man standing there didn't match the polished image she had half expected from the service's reviews. No tailored suit, no overpowering cologne. He wore a faded wool coat over a simple shirt, his shoes polished but worn, and his face carried the lines of someone who had seen more than he let on. His eyes, a steady gray, held a quiet depth that made her pause. "I'm Nathan," he said, his voice low and even like a calm anchor in the storm outside. "I'm here as requested." Jenna stepped aside, letting him in. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in the dim glow of her living room lamp. She gestured to the worn armchair across from her sofa, her movements mechanical. "Sit, please. Would you like water, coffee?" "Water's fine," he replied, removing his coat and folding it neatly over the armrest. He didn't fidget or fill the silence with small talk. He simply waited. She handed him a glass, then sat down, her fingers twisting in her lap. "The rule's no touching unless I say so. No crossing lines. If I want you to leave, you go." "Understood." Nathan nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. You set the pace. If all you need is someone here, that's what I'll be. And you can stop anytime." His words hung in the air, simple yet reassuring. Jenna exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in months, the apartment didn't feel so empty. She glanced at him, searching for judgment in his expression, but found none. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He took a sip of water before answering. "People have reasons. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's to connect without the weight of tomorrow." Jenna leaned back, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. "I don't know why I did this. It's not what people think. I need someone to see me. Not fix me, just see." Nathan set his glass down gently. "Then tell me if you want." And she did. The words spilled out slowly at first, then in a rush, like a dam finally cracking under pressure. She spoke of her childhood in a quiet Ohio suburb, where books and daydreams had been her escape from a home filled with unspoken tensions. Of moving to New York with stars in her eyes, landing the copywriter job that promised creativity but delivered endless revisions and client demands. Of Mark, who had seemed perfect on paper but faded when life got real. He said I was too independent, she murmured, her voice cracking. But really, he meant I was too broken to bother fixing. Through it all, Nathan listened. He didn't interrupt with advice or stories of his own. He didn't offer empty platitudes like, "You'll find someone better." He simply nodded at the right moments, his presence a silent affirmation that her words mattered. For the first time in what felt like years, Jenna felt seen not as the polished professional or the heartbroken ex, but as herself, raw and real. As the clock ticked past midnight, she looked at him, a tentative smile forming. "Thank you for staying. I think I could use a bit more time." Nathan returned the smile faintly. "I'm here." The clock had slipped past midnight, but the rain outside showed no sign of letting up its relentless patter, a steady backdrop to the unexpected intimacy unfolding in Jenna's living room. She had expected the evening to end awkwardly, perhaps with a polite goodbye, and a lingering sense of regret for booking the service at all. Instead, Nathan's quiet presence had cracked open a door she hadn't realized was locked. As she finished recounting her breakup, the words hanging in the air like fragile ornaments, she glanced at him. He hadn't moved, his posture relaxed but attentive, the glass of water still half full in his hand. "You're a good listener," Jenna said, her voice softer now, the initial tension easing from her shoulders. "Most people jump in with advice or their own stories. You just sit there." Nathan met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes that's all someone needs, to be heard without the noise." She nodded, pulling her knees up onto the sofa, wrapping her arms around them like a shield. The apartment felt warmer somehow, the dim lamp casting long shadows that danced with the rain's rhythm on the windows. Emboldened by his silence, Jenna continued delving deeper into the fragments of her life. She spoke of her days at the agency where creativity had once flowed like a river, but now felt dammed by endless client revisions and performance metrics. "I write words that convince people to buy things they don't need," she said with a wry smile. "But when it comes to my own story, I can't even convince myself I'm okay." Nathan tilted his head slightly as if weighing her words. "Sounds like you're carrying a lot of expectations. From work, from friends, from yourself?" Jenna laughed lightly, a sound that surprised even her. "You sound like you've been there." He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of the glass absent-mindedly. For the first time, he shared a sliver of his own world, not a flood, but a careful trickle. "My father was a driven man," Nathan said, his tone even without bitterness. "He built a life around success, measured everything by outcomes. I learned early to read people, to anticipate what they wanted before they said it. It helped in negotiations, I suppose, but it also meant I forgot how to just be." Jenna studied him, the faint lines around his eyes, suggesting stories he wasn't ready to unpack fully. "Negotiations. You don't strike me as a salesman." A flicker crossed his face, something almost like amusement quickly masked. "Not exactly, but life's full of deals, isn't it? Some spoken, some silent." The conversation meandered from there, weaving through lighter memories. Jenna recalled summers in Ohio, riding her bike down dusty roads, dreaming of the big city lights that now mocked her from the window. Nathan offered glimpses of his own youth, late nights studying under a desk lamp, the pressure to excel turning every achievement into a stepping stone rather than a victory. I got good at wearing masks, he admitted quietly. So good sometimes I forget what's underneath. Jenna leaned forward, her eyes narrowing playfully. You seem like someone who's been playing a role for so long, you've forgotten the script is yours to rewrite. Nathan stilled his expression, shifting for a split second, a subtle crack in his composure like a ripple on still water. He recovered quickly, offering a small smile. Maybe, but tonight, listening to you, it feels real. No script. The words hung between them, charged with an unspoken connection. Jenna felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from attraction, but from the rare gift of vulnerability shared without demand. As the hours stretched, the rain softening to a drizzle, she realized she didn't want the night to end. Would you stay a little longer? She asked, her voice tentative. Nathan nodded without hesitation. As long as you need. They sat in companionable silence, then the weight of their stories settling like a shared blanket. For Jenna, it was a reprieve from the isolation that had become her norm. 3 days had passed since that unexpected night in her apartment, but the memory lingered like a half-forgotten dream. Nathan's quiet presence, the way his listening had unraveled her defenses without a single demand. Jenna had woken the next morning feeling lighter, as if sharing her burdens had lifted an invisible weight. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. The service was anonymous after all. But a small part of her wondered if their connection had been more than transactional. Now standing in the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, Jenna tugged at the hem of her sleek black evening gown, the fabric clinging uncomfortably in the warm air thick with perfume and chatter. The networking event was a mandatory affair for her agency, hobnobbing with potential clients, flashing smiles that promised creative genius. She had almost skipped it, pleading a headache, but her boss had insisted. Opportunities like this don't come every day, he'd said. So here she was, nursing a glass of champagne, her nukwoi guangao, as she navigated clusters of suited executives exchanging business cards like currency. The MC took the stage, his voice booming over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we're thrilled to kick off tonight's event with a keynote from one of the most innovative minds in tech. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Novatech, Mr. Nathan Cole. The room erupted in applause, a wave of admiration rippling through the crowd. Jenna froze her champagne flute midway to her lips. On the massive LED screen behind the podium, a familiar face appeared, sharp jawline, those steady grey eyes, the faint lines that spoke of hidden depths. Nathan Cole, the reclusive billionaire whose company had revolutionized data analytics, turning Novatech into a powerhouse valued at billions. Headlines flashed in her mind: the cold strategist, the enigma who shunned the spotlight, preferring boardrooms to red carpets. Her heart slammed against her ribs, a frantic rhythm drowning out the cheers. It couldn't be. But as he stepped onto the stage, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his voice carrying the same low measured tone, she remembered the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. This was the man who had sat in her armchair listening to her pour out her soul. Not an escort, a CEO, a billionaire playing some twisted game. Jenna's mind raced, piecing together fragments. The app, anonymous, discreet. His reluctance to share too much about himself. The way he had learned to read people. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. She recalled a vague article she'd skimmed months ago about Novatech's controversial social disguise program, where executives went undercover to understand real people for market insights. Was she just data A test subject in his elite world, her vulnerabilities dissected for corporate gain? The applause faded as Nathan began his speech, his words on innovation and human connection ringing hollow in her ears. In a world of facades, he said smoothly, true progress comes from seeing beyond the surface. Jenna's stomach twisted. Hypocrite. Her hands trembled, the champagne threatening to spill. Flashes of that night replayed her tears, her confessions about Mark, her raw admission of feeling invisible. All real to her, but to him, a performance, an experiment. She set the glass down on a nearby table with a clink that seemed deafening in her head. The room spun slightly as she wove through the crowd, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Whispers followed her curious glances from colleagues, but she didn't care. Outside the ballroom, she pushed through a side door to a quiet balcony overlooking the bustling streets of Fifth Avenue. The cool night air hit her face, but it did little to quell the storm inside. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, a text from a coworker asking if she was all right. The balcony overlooked the glittering chaos of Fifth Avenue, where taxis honked and pedestrians hurried under umbrellas, oblivious to the storm brewing in Jenna's chest. The cool night air whipped at her gown, but she barely felt it. Her skin prickled with a heat born of betrayal. She gripped the railing knuckles white, staring at the city lights that now seemed mocking like spotlights on her humiliation. The text from her coworker buzzed again in her clutch, but she ignored it. How could she explain that the keynote speaker, the untouchable Nathan Cole, had been in her apartment privy to her most vulnerable confessions? Footsteps echoed behind her, deliberate, unhurried. Jenna didn't turn. She knew who it was. The door to the ballroom clicked shut, sealing them in a pocket of tense solitude amid the distant hum of the event. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice steady but laced with ice still facing the skyline. "I had to come," Nathan replied, his tone calm, almost resigned. He stopped a few feet away, respecting the invisible barrier she had erected. "Jenna, please. Let me explain." She whipped around, then her eyes flashing with a fury that had been building since the moment his face appeared on that screen. "Explain? You mean justify why a billionaire CEO decided to play pretend in my living room? Why you let me bare my soul to someone I thought was disposable? Just another anonymous face from an app." Nathan's expression remained composed, but a shadow crossed his features, a flicker of regret that didn't soften her resolve. He slipped his hands into his pockets, the suit that had looked so commanding on stage now seeming out of place in this raw confrontation. "It wasn't meant to be a game. Novatech has had a program, Social Disguise. It's about understanding people without the filter of status. I went undercover to see life from the ground level to inform our products. But that night, I didn't plan on you." Jenna laughed bitterly, the sound sharp in the night air. "Oh, so I'm an accident, a glitch in your grand experiment. You sat there, Nathan, or should I say Mr. Cole, and listened to me talk about my breakup, my fears, my loneliness. And all the while you were, taking mental notes for your next board meeting." He took a step closer, but halted when she flinched. "No, the program is about empathy and business, but what happened between us was real. Every word I said, every moment I listened, that wasn't data. It was me without the title connecting with you." I should have told you who I was, but I was afraid it would shatter what we had built in those hours. Afraid. She shook her head, tears stinging her eyes, now not from sadness, but from the raw sting of deception. You, the man who commands billions afraid. What about me? I trusted you, because I thought you were like me, someone navigating life without a safety net. But you had the ultimate one-power money, the ability to walk away unscathed. I didn't consent to being your test subject. I deserved the truth from the start. Nathan's shoulders sagged slightly, the first crack in his polished facade. You're right. I was wrong to think I could control the narrative, to believe that keeping my identity hidden would make the connection purer. It was selfish, arrogant, and it hurt you, the one person who made me feel seen beyond the boardroom. The admission hung between them heavy and unyielding. Jenna's breath came in shallow bursts, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. A part of her wanted to believe the sincerity in his eyes, the way his voice cracked just a fraction. But the betrayal cut too deep. Real or not, you crossed a line. You took my vulnerability and turned it into whatever this was. Respect, trust. You've lost both. She turned away, the city blurring through unshed tears. Nathan didn't follow as she walked back toward the door, her heels echoing like finality. Jenna, he called softly, but she didn't stop. 2 months passed in a blur of routine work, solitary evenings, the occasional coffee, with friends who sensed her distance but didn't pry. No messages from Nathan, no grand gestures, just silence, which in its way was a mercy. Then one morning, an internal memo circulated at her agency. Novatech had abruptly ended its social disguise initiative, with the CEO publicly admitting in a press release that it had overstepped ethical boundaries. Jenna read it twice, her heart twisting at the quiet accountability. A week later, an email arrived from the nonprofit she had pitched a project to months ago, support for urban women facing isolation. Funding had come through, anonymous but substantial. Attached was a note. This was always your vision. It deserves to exist without strings. She knew without a doubt who had sent it. For the first time in a long while, the tears that fell were not of pain, but of a fragile, tentative release. 2 months blurred into a routine of agency deadlines and quiet evenings, where Jenna buried herself in work to avoid the echo of that balcony confrontation. The sting of betrayal had dulled to a persistent ache, like a bruise she pressed on occasionally, to remind herself not to trust so easily. She hadn't heard from Nathan, no calls, no emails, no contrived run-ins at industry events. In a way, the silence was a relief. It allowed her to rebuild her walls brick by careful brick. Then one crisp autumn morning, an internal newsletter pinged in her inbox. The headline caught her eye: Novatech axes controversial social disguise program amid ethical concerns. She clicked through her coffee, growing cold as she read. The CEO, Nathan Cole, had issued a statement. We've overstepped boundaries in pursuit of understanding. Effective immediately, the initiative is terminated, and we're implementing new ethical guidelines to ensure transparency in all our endeavors. No fanfare, no excuses. Just accountability. Jenna stared at the screen, a mix of vindication and unease swirling in her chest. Had her words that night prompted this? Or was it just damage control? A week later, another email arrived, this one from the nonprofit she had pitched months ago, a program to support women navigating urban isolation through community workshops and anonymous support networks. The subject line, funding secured, project greenlit. Her proposal, once dismissed for lack of resources, was now fully backed by an anonymous donor. Attached was a brief note. "This was always your vision. It deserves to exist without strings attached." The phrasing hit her like a whisper from the past. She knew. Tears welled up unbidden, spilling over as she sat at her desk. Not from anger this time, but from the quiet realization that he had listened, truly listened to her dreams that night. A part of her had been seen, even if under false pretenses. The tears brought clarity. She wasn't ready to forgive, not fully, but the action spoke louder than any apology. Nathan hadn't tried to buy her back with grand gestures. He'd corrected his course, letting the changes stand on their own merit. 3 months after the event, on a mild afternoon, Jenna found herself at a small cafe near Central Park. The leaves had turned golden, carpeting the paths where joggers and families strolled. She had sent a simple message through a mutual contact. Coffee, neutral ground, no expectations. He had agreed without hesitation. Nathan arrived on time, dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, no trace of the corporate armor from the gala. He slid into the seat across from her, a tentative smile on his face. "Thank you for this." Jenna stirred her latte, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm not here to absolve you, but the program ending, the funding, those were steps in the right direction." He nodded, no defensiveness in his posture. "I meant what I said that night. I was wrong. Power blinded me to the human cost. Ending it was the least I could do. As for the donation, your idea was brilliant. It needed to happen regardless of us." "Us?" She raised an eyebrow, but there was no edge to it. "There isn't an us yet, maybe never, but I'm willing to start over. With truth this time. No masks, no hidden agendas." Nathan's expression softened, a genuine warmth breaking through. "That's all I could hope for. Truth it is." They talked then, not as escort and client or CEO and outsider, but as two people scarred by expectations, his from a life of relentless achievement, hers from relationships that demanded perfection. The conversation flowed easily, touching on books they'd read, places they'd traveled, dreams deferred. Laughter came unexpectedly, lightening the air as the sun dipped lower. As they walked out into the park, the fading light casting long shadows, Jenna felt a tentative peace settle. A part of her guarded heart cracked open, not from forgiveness handed freely, but from the responsibility he had shouldered. Nathan had learned that true connection couldn't be engineered or bought. It had to be earned through accountability. Under the golden hues of sunset, they paused by a bench, the city humming around them. "This feels simple," Jenna said, glancing at him. "It is," Nathan replied, "and that's the point, being seen without the weight of who we are on paper." They parted with a promise of another coffee, no rush, no strings. In that moment, Jenna understood healing wasn't about erasing the past, but choosing to build on its lessons. And in a world of facades, that was the most real thing of all.